Hello. How's
Hello,
Bite?
hello.
Hello, hello. How are you doing?
Fine.
Excellent.
Here we have it,
That looks good.
which is Proverbs Part 3,
That's correct.
August 2020.
That's correct.
Drew Resnick, CBS Adult Education. What we call it CBS Independent Adult Education.
We're going to create our own name.
Unofficial adult
Make
education.
it in Hebrew, yes. Absolutely. God. What's new?
Nothing at all that I know of.
That's good.
Other than reducing everything to the lowest common denominator for high holy days because we couldn't get our act together to do anything more.
Oh, you mean CBS wise? Or in general?
No, CBS wise. I think other people are doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, this is a missed opportunity.
Yep.
And that's a shame. It's a real shame.
The lack of organization and structure and any kind of approach to doing this it's just chaos.
Yes.
It's no. I'm going to make you a co-host just in case you.
That's good. Maybe you should also take us off recording for right now.
That's okay. Who cares? How do I do that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you go to not share screen.
Pause recording. Recording. I've resumed recording. Okay, here we go.
Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you all for being here. And this is the last of our series on Proverbs. We may go a little over the hour, but probably not. So I want to make sure that everybody has a copy of the book of Proverbs with you. And if you don't have Siddur Shalom for Pirkei Avot, you can do that. If you're looking for Proverbs, you can go to Chabad.org or to Sefaria.org and type in Proverbs and you'll get to the pages, and that should suffice if you do not have a hard copy of that.
Trump had them too.
Go get my hard copy. It left my...
Whatever. Okay. So Martin, if you'll move to the next slide, we're going to do just a quick review of what we did when we first met. I gave an introduction to what the book of Proverbs is, that it was written and edited by many, attributed to King Solomon, written during his middle years, and that most people agree that Song of Songs was something that would have been done when he was young, Proverbs in middle age, Ecclesiastes Kohelet when he was older. Found in the Hebrew Bible, usually between Psalms and Job, which makes no sense to me whatsoever, but that's another story entirely. There's various opinions about when Proverbs was written, but we are going to discuss very briefly in a moment when Proverbs was canonized. It was influenced by ancient writings outside of Judea, which we talked about in the second session, which you'll see on the next slide, found throughout many Jewish rituals, heavily quoted in Pirkei Avot, which we will spend a little bit of time on today, with fragments found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Next slide, please. In part 2, we learned that Proverbs is divided basically into 5 different sections and became part of a school curriculum, and I use the term very loosely from this because it was part of the mandatory education that came under King Hezekiah, who Mishnah credits with writing Proverbs. It's categorized as wisdom literature, and as we saw last month, taking a look at the different Sumerian, Akkadian, and Egyptian wisdom literature, may or may not have been influenced by, stolen from, acquired by, redacted from all of these other kinds of wisdom literature that predated the period that we believe that Proverbs was written. So
Sue?
now, yes, sir.
The Mishnah credits Proverbs to Hezekiah, not to Solomon.
They say that Solomon wrote some of it, but Hezekiah and his committee, they call it the group of elders from this, were the people who were most responsible for, they say writing. Is it compiling? Is it editing? We're not sure, but King Hezekiah is specifically mentioned in Mishnah as being given full credit, given a great deal of credit for Proverbs. And the reference is there, Bava Batra 15a, where that comes from.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we are into today. If you next slide, please. Okay, we're going to take a look at Pirkei Avot. And if you have the Siddur Sim Shalom, we're on page 279. And if you don't, you can find it at chapter 6, verse 7. But first, there is no scholarly consensus as to when the Hebrew, when Tanakh was canonized. Some scholars say it was fixed during the Hasmonean dynasty from about 140 to 40 BCE. Some say it wasn't fixed until the 2nd century CE, but we know from this because we're reading the period from Pirkei Avot, which is credited around 200 CE, that this is the period from this, that when you see how many of the Proverbs are referenced, particularly in this one section we're going to take a look at from this, is that Proverbs was very much a part of the canon of information that the rabbis were drawing from.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Pirkei Avot is part of the Mishnah.
Pirkei Avot is part of the Mishnah, and the Mishnah was at about 200 CE.
200, yeah.
Right. So already by this time, Proverbs has been canonized from this. It's part of the Tanakh literature from this that they're talking about from this. So it would be easy for the rabbis to draw on this. Is Pirkei Avot considered wisdom literature? The simple answer is no, because it's not considered wisdom literature in the way that we think of Proverbs with the Sumerian, the Akkadian, and the Egyptian wisdom literatures that we talked about last month. It's not in that vein, but it is wisdom literature in that it is drawing into us wisdom that is then conveyed through the rabbis and then is proof texted through information from the Tanakh, whether it is from different parts of the Torah, whether it's Psalms, whether it's Proverbs, whether it's the prophets from this. But they rely very heavily from this, particularly in chapter 6, from this on quoting from Proverbs. This part of the Mishnah for chapter 6, verse 7 that I want to talk about is the one that is the most laden with Proverbs references. Okay? Does everybody have a copy of it in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So let me read it to you in the English. You can follow along in the Hebrew.
Yes.
Where are we? Pirkei Avot.
Right. Pirkei Avot. How great is Torah? To those who fulfill it, it provides life in this world and in the world to come. As it is written, first of all, Proverbs 4:22, that basically saying that ethical living will enhance the quality of life, that wisdom provides instruction for the mind and healing for the body, that wisdom is shifted from the experience of the world to a relationship with the divine from this. And in that particular statement from this, it says, oh, does this sound familiar? Eitz chayim chi lamachazikim ba, b'tochecha meushar. Oh, Yeah,
No.
when do we say that?
By the Torah.
And when the Torah gets put back.
Right, now,
Sue, where are you in Pirkei Avot? Because I don't,
chapter 7.
Yeah,
So
just-
chapter 6, verse 7.
chapter 6, verse 7. Okay.
Right. If you have the Siddur Sim Shalom, it's on page 279.
If I had, we only happen to have one copy of it, and somebody else in another room has it, so I'm in the old one.
Who was it that took it? Debbie?
Are you on Safaria?
No, I'm in the old Siddur Sim Shalom. Just give me chapter and verse, as they say.
Chapter 6, verse 7.
Got it. Okay.
No, chapter 7, verse 6.
No,
No,
it is Torah.
chapter 6, verse 7.
Oh, you're right. Sorry.
That's okay. In the section called the Baraita of Rabbi Meir. Okay?
Okay, got it. Okay.
Got it? Okay.
Yeah.
From this. So, oh yeah, we've heard the statement, Eitz Chaim Hi L'Machazikim Ba, from this. But let me read to you very briefly what precedes it. You might find it a little interesting. Here it is. Darche Noam, V'chol Netivotecha Shalom.
I've heard that.
Anybody heard that?
I've heard that.
That's when the services start, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Which service?
Well, the end of the Torah service. I was kidding. That's when I get to shul.
The Torah. And the Torah service. I also.
No.
Okay, from this. Why else from this is, according to Rabbi Meir, is Torah great, and those who fulfill it provide life both in this world and the world to come. Because wisdom from this is an adornment. From this, it's the garland reserved for those whose status is elevated. Because the rabbis also agreed that wearing a garland was a symbol of an elevated status. Those who wore that from this were in the higher class. That
Is that like a wreath, do you think, on your head?
I'm sorry?
I'm just wondering where you wear a garland. Should I ever acquire that status? Is that something like around your neck, do you think, or something?
That which you wear around your neck from this. We discussed this also with Bex 2 weeks ago.
Oops.
Okay. Yes, Al.
I misunderstand. Why did you mention that verse that comes after Eitz Chaim and the Siddur?
Also because these are two critical elements of the Torah service.
But where is it? Is it here in Pirkei Avot somewhere?
And no. It's in Proverbs.
Oh.
Both of those statements come from Proverbs.
Okay.
And are they ones that you have on the top of the screen?
The one that I have for it says Proverbs 3:18.
Okay.
All right. Proverbs 3:18 is Eitz Chaim Hi L'Machazikim Ba.
What is the problem?
But the statement before it is the other one from this, that Proverbs from this has found its way into our Torah service.
Okay.
And becomes a part of joining from this wisdom, that kind of wisdom, into she's new to the group, Martin.
It's coming in.
You can.
So Sue?
Yes.
It's difficult to have two books open at the same time. That was my confusion.
No, you don't have to have them both done, but I wanted just to talk about Pirkei Avot from this because the statements from Proverbs are there in the Hebrew of Pirkei Avot, chapter 6, verse 7.
Okay.
But I'm just talking, I want to elevate I want to garland you a little bit more with some knowledge about from the fact that Torah service from this has drawn in, that whoever put together the Torah service drew in these elements from Proverbs.
Hey, I found another one. Proverbs 4:2. Ki lekach tov natati lechem torati al ta'azovu.
Uh-huh.
I think we don't sing that. It's just before the part we start singing with Eitz Chaim He.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Again, from this, like many of the things that we know from our Jewish literature, we are drawing, we'll take what we want and maybe cut off the end of it or talk about the beginning of it. And then we're going to talk about a little bit of it when we talk about Eshet Chayil from this in a minute. So as you see from this slide, that these are all from this, that Rabbi Meir from this drew completely on Proverbs as a way of assigning to us from this the fact that even Solomon understood how important Torah was, and that Torah is an integral part of Proverbs and Proverbs to Torah. Okay.
So is this very common to take from something like, is there a lot of places in the Torah service that are taken from earlier things?
Not only the Torah service, but throughout the Torah, throughout the service.
The Torah, right? Exactly.
Yeah,
so that was a very common thing. Interesting. Everybody else probably knew that. I didn't.
But you take the Amida, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, that's from the Torah, which is why we had a big debate in the conservative movement about adding the Imahot, because they are not mentioned in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And from this, and you will see also from this that in the prayer that directly precedes Ashrei, from this is that it is laced with quotes from Psalms, quotes from the prophets, quotes from Proverbs. From this, it's not just the idea of one prayer coming from whoever it was who decided to write that. From this is that they proof texted everything from this by drawing in from all of these different resources.
Which is very common in everything that we do.
Exactly. So Rabbi Meir's chapter 6 in particular, from this, he quotes very heavily into Proverbs from this, although you will find that in other parts of the Avot literature from this, when you study Pirkei Avot. And we talked a little bit about that when we studied the Pirkei Avot book by Yitz Greenberg. So, any questions? Any answers? Any comments? Okay, let's move on to the next.
I had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
go ahead.
I lost you. Just a second. Wait, I lost you. Here we go. Anyway, yeah, I have a question. So when you say that, I wasn't here for the Pirkei Avot book, so it may be repetitive, but they were including these things, but then they have discussions about them? Is that included in the Pirkei Avot? Because it's not included in our little thing here in the Siddur.
If you just take a look at the quote itself, and this particularly this one that's on the screen, from this,
right.
See from this that every single sentence that follows what Rabbi Meir says, which is Torah provides life for those in this world and the world to come. He
right.
used every single one of these quotations from Proverbs as his proof text.
Okay, so he didn't make any other commentary. He just used the thinking
about Pirkei Avot as a part of the Talmud is that you have the Mishnah. There is no Gemara for Pirkei Avot.
Okay, well that's what I was asking, I guess. I wanted to know if there was Gemara. I know there's Mishnah on it, but I didn't know there was Gemara.
Right, this is the Mishnah.
This is
Mishnah.
Right.
Pirkei Avot is Mishnah.
Yes, Steve Baker.
Isn't the quotation in Proverbs is talking about wisdom, and then in Pirkei Avot, they're using that quotation to talk about Torah.
Right, because what is Torah?
Torah is not wisdom literature.
It's not wisdom literature, but is it wisdom?
Should I say yes?
No, you don't have to. We can have a whole discussion about that.
That was just something of a perplexity on my part.
According to the Mishnah rabbis from this, is that Torah was wisdom.
I see.
But where else is it articulated a lot of using the term of seeing it as wisdom? It's in Proverbs. But it's, Debbie?
It's in the Kugel book that we just finished also. That this concept of wisdom developed like during the Second Temple period, also under the influence of other societies in the Mediterranean. And so our wisdom was Torah, our piece of it.
Right.
That's what's in from Kugel.
Right.
Rabbi Meir.
Isn't the word Torah also used to describe all of our literature? When we talk about studying Torah, we can be talking about studying the other books of the Tanakh or Mishnah, Chumash, and anything else, no?
Yes.
Yeah, Rabbi Jacob Neusner, I'm looking at the Neusner version of Pirkei Avot. And Neusner says clearly, he says, anyone who delves into Torah, and quote what Rabbi Meir says, delves into Torah, and he puts in parentheses, study. In other words, from Neusner's point of view, the word Torah means more than just the 5 books of Moses.
Right. Right. It's the learn it all while standing on one foot. So,
and holding an apple on your head.
Yes. Is there any other comments or questions? Okay, let's move on.
Moving right along.
Moving right along. So, when I was studying this whole thing and trying to figure out things, I came across at least 5 different scholars who agree that the most obscure proverb in the book, oh, by the way, you can put away Pirkei Avot right now. We're done with it. Is Proverbs 26:10 from this, which I have put here from this and put in 3 different interpretations of what this means, and then I want to talk about it. And it is Rav Mechulel Kol V'Shocher Kisol V'Sechor Ovrim. Have I butchered that enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Would you like to correct me, please?
It's okay.
And it's Proverbs 26:10. So,
wow.
Yeah. Everybody, all of the different things that I read from this, there is pages and pages and pages of discussion about what does this mean from this, which also says to me that it's nice to know that even the rabbis from this were perplexed by this. What is the meaning of this particular proverb? And even Rashi had a problem with it for this, which is nice to know. From this, so Martin, can you read? Or Debbie, can you read for us nicely what the Hebrew that I butchered?
It's Rav Mecholal Kol V'Socher Kasil V'Socher Ovrim.
Okay.
And just let me read the art scroll because it's even different.
Okay. What does the art scroll say?
They translate Rav as a contentious person.
Okay.
May cause many deaths.
Uh-huh.
He hires, socher is to hire or to employ, which is in the Rashi.
Okay.
Kasil is definitely a fool. Everyone agrees on that.
Do you really know what Kasil is?
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah.
Okay, the socher ovrim, and he hires. Now, what's ovrim? I don't know that it's a flood. It says here,
Rashi is
Archibald
right
says,
on this. Rashi translates it better.
It says here adventurers.
yes, in Art Scroll it's
In
adventure.
Art Scroll it says adventurers.
Well, Rashi is the most accurate in my view. Humbly.
Okay.
Humbly
Now-
speaking.
Okay.
Okay,
Because
so
Oak
what's
Creek is definitely
what's
not
the
a flood.
Castile?
Right.
Yeah, I don't get that at all.
Okay.
Okay,
It-
go on. Yeah.
It's actually probably commentary that they then put into a translation. And also, interestingly enough, since I also relied on Rabbi Cohen for his translation, his parallels King James
Oh,
Aha.
in how he translates it, which I thought was interesting. And then we have Charles Fritsch, who went off on this. I don't even know what kind of a tangent that was.
Well, chalal is like space or a hole or something.
No.
So
Yeah, cholel is a space.
Okay.
it creates a space, mecholal, apparently.
Okay.
Anyway, all right, but I'm interested in Castile now.
Okay. First of all,
In a
from
song,
this,
maybe.
so-
Find it in a song.
It's in
And
the song at the beginning.
Still Lo Mevin Zot is one of the songs we read.
It's
okay.
also a fool. Yeah.
All right. So Castile from this, and this will have a great interest for some of our science and NASA geeks. Castile from this, the word is mentioned 3 times in the Torah, and it is often translated as fool. However, there are some who say, take a look at the etymology. And it is most closely associated with what month of the year?
this month?
Kislev.
Very
Kislev.
good. Okay. And Kislev from this, depending upon when they decided Kislev really was in what we now consider to be our months, began really in October, sort of, possibly November, December. From this, the idea of it running through the month of February, which is when the constellation Orion is most visible. Kislev then being translated to mean Orion.
What?
This and referenced in Job twice and in Amos. In Job, where he says, he, God, is the maker of the bear and Orion.
Oh,
In Job, again, where he says, can you loosen Orion's belt? And in Amos, where he writes, God who made the Pleiades and Orion.
Gosh. How about that?
How about that? From the-
Yeah.
And so Rashi, taking this a step further, says that this is the period in which God prevents people from going to sea until after Pesach. Why does he say that? I don't know.
Can you forgive my ignorance, which is quite large sometimes?
Yeah.
This is the first time I can think of that I have ever heard a connection between the stars and what we read. I mean, it's always seemed to me that astrology or astronomy or whatever you want to call it doesn't seem to figure in very much in our tradition. So this is like a whole sort of aha moment.
Uh-huh.
Sue, I don't remember where my reading, I don't know where my reading is, Suzanne, but it seems to me that there were rabbis who believed in astrology. That was what was going around at the time.
Well, that would have been during the rabbinical period more than, or because maybe I'm wrong, but I would have thought of that about a little later than when the Bible was being written.
what do you mean by Bible?
I'm sorry, let me let me backtrack. I guess what I'm saying is, I can't remember in my education very much, like I said, about astronomy and astrology, whatever you want to call it, fitting in with our traditions.
Do you mean the Torah, the Tanakh?
The Tanakh, maybe, yeah. Have I missed it? I probably have.
Well, look, the rabbis were very familiar with all this stuff because they used all this stuff to configure the dates of the Chagim and all kinds of
Yes, you're right. They would have.
The year, and they understood the months, and they understood the seasons, and they understood all that stuff.
I would like to point out that the word mazal, as in mazel tov, means originally constellation.
No, I did not. This
When you say mazel tov, you're saying under a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're really saying. Although
for a sign of
so again, this points out that all of the people from that time periods we're talking about, rather than being in isolation, and we know they weren't, knew things from other cultures that sometimes we don't think about.
Where was a lot of the other influence coming from, who had already done a lot of astronomical research?
The
was
Greeks.
Babylonia.
Babylon, of course, yeah.
The Persians.
Not so much the Babylonians before, yeah, because this is way before the Greeks.
And when we were in Israel, if I'm not mistaken, there was synagogues that on the floor was zodiac.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
The famous synagogue in Beit Alpha.
You're right.
Signs of the zodiac on the floor.
Of course.
We read
like I
about
said,
that.
please forgive I'm just now starting to put all of this together.
Don't worry about it. From this, it actually has inspired me. I might actually, I would like to encourage Al Fiveson with his NASA background.
Yeah.
Maybe look at astronomy and Torah.
That would be fascinating, Al.
I want to ask you for those references, by the way. Could you send them? You mentioned those references about Orion's belt and the Pleiades.
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. So let me briefly read to you from this. Oh, I'm sorry, Etta, you had a comment.
One more question about this. When they're talking about the constellations, aren't they just talking about the astronomy of it and not the astrology?
Yeah.
Yes.
You mean they eschewed the superstitions?
So they're talking about a time period because the constellations tell you what season you're in also, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All I can say is the BDB, which is the reference to the origins of Hebrew words, says Ksil is a stupid fellow, Ksilut is stupidity, and Ksil is Orion, relation to above, obscure.
Uh-huh.
Somebody's hedging their bets there.
Like that.
So, so the question is in fact, what Rashi is trying to talk about, the reference that these people who are the transients, who are the wayfarers, is that the term that was used, Sandra, in your translation?
No, it says a contentious person may hire, so he hires adventurers.
Okay.
How would they have gotten to the place from this where they were? They would have had to use something in the sky to guide them to the place.
Well, a planet is a wandering star, right?
Yes.
A planet is a wandering star. Yes.
Kochav as a wandering star. So Ksil is a constellation of stars, right. And Ovrim then would be planets. So Socher Ksil Socher Ovrim means one who employs the constellations and planets for knowledge.
Uh-huh. Let me read to you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's how they would relate that to fools. If anybody's foolish enough to believe that the stars and planets give you real information.
That's what
that.
I'm saying, yeah.
Okay.
Time for Erev Shoshan, Debbie.
Al, say what you said again. I couldn't hear you.
Well, I'm just wondering if maybe that's how they tie that to a fool, someone who believes in astrology, not astronomy, but astrology, about good luck and bad on the stars. Maybe that they're a fool to follow this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's sort of how it would tie in, yeah.
Well, and I was going to say for this, and I did not take a close study to see if the word fool is the same word that's used, that might be used here from this, because Solomon, and we're going to say that Solomon was the one who wrote all of this from this, had no patience for fools. And you will see the translation of the word fool throughout Proverbs from this. He had no patience for them whatsoever. Let me just read to you very briefly from a book called A Modern Commentary in Proverbs by Leonard Kravitz and Carrie Olitsky, their comment about this passage. This is a difficult verse to translate and understand, no kidding. Because the word that hung them up was the word micholel. Its translation is dependent on the root from which it is derived. It could be from the PL form of chul or the polel form of halal. If it is from the first, that is the PL form of chul, then it could mean to cause to turn or to whirl. But if it is from the second, that is from the polel form of halal, then there are further problems to be resolved, since there are three different possible roots, which are homonyms: to profane, to begin, and to pierce. Well, that takes care of Charles Fritsch there. Rashi takes Rav to refer, meaning master, to refer to God, and Micholel, meaning to create. He interprets the term to hire as Don, meaning judge. Unlike a human master, God says, unlike a human master, God, says Rashi, involves the divine self with those who are fools and those who are passers-by, who he interprets as being idlers. Ibn Ezra takes Rav as a human ruler who controls everything, who by hiring fools compels the fool to work, and also hires those who would otherwise pass, that is, reject God's rule. Gersonides, our good friend Ralbag, takes Rav to be a quarrelsome human ruler who injures Micholel and kills, but oddly enough, does good to the foolish and the ovrim, passers, transgressors, and sinners.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like, what is going on here? So
Hebrew doesn't have enough words, so the words could mean lots of things.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Debbie. Debbie just sent me a translation of Orion.
Well, it's the whole thing.
I see. Both times associated with the Pleiades, yes, which Job also talked about. So, interestingly enough. Any last questions, comments, or anything else regarding this most obscure part of Proverbs?
As you can see, dear, you can translate this in so many ways. We have no idea what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah, a Gemara on this.
That's why we have so much, back and forth on everything, because everything has more than one meaning.
Right.
Eric's right. It would have been good if we had a little Gemara on this to explain it.
Exactly. All right. Next, we have probably the part of Proverbs that people are most familiar with, and that for some of us make us squirm a little bit. So it's Eshet Chayil, which many of you know is sung in many mostly Orthodox, but some conservative homes on Shabbat. as an ode to the woman of the house, the person who makes it all happen. So if you have a copy of Proverbs, if you'll turn to chapter 31, we're going to take a look at the beginning of this. Because just as I said before, just like a whole lot of other stuff that we do from this, we often cut off the beginning of it, or we cut off the end of it, and we only redact the part that we want to be talking about.
Right.
So, chapter 31. So it begins from this Divrei Lemuel Melech, from this, the words of King Lemuel. So who was this Lemuel? Well, there was no King Lemuel, from this, as most of you who know anything about Jewish history knows. It was, according to the rabbis, a term of endearment that was given to King Solomon by his mother. But the question that the rabbis ask is it Lemuel? That would mean, from this, the one towards God, or is it Lama Lanu El, meaning why God? Basically, why God? Why is God? It asks a question. So here is what Sanhedrin has to say about this. So Gemara ties this whole thing with the story about who King Lemuel is to Noah getting drunk. Okay. From this, so when in Sanhedrin 70b, they are talking about the words of King Lemuel and the burden with which his mother corrected him, from this, which is Proverbs 31:1. From this is that perhaps even she was kind of like hitting her head and going, why, God, why did you give me this son from this? Because the son that I have asked for was one who would be, I prayed for a child. This child that I wanted was the one who was going to be brilliant in Torah and scholarly, and not this son that I'm about to talk about a little bit from this, who was really not quite the son that I had always hoped him to be. And importantly, in verse 2, the speaker, who we are going to assume for the moment is Bathsheba, talking about her son Solomon, uses the term bar 3 times.
See that, yeah.
Okay. Where does the term bar come from? What is the origin of the term? What's the etymology?
It's Aramaic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it like a conjunction, a conjecture where you put bet and resh, like Baruch Rabbah or something?
No.
It is Aramaic for son.
It is Aramaic. Well, this is one of the first times that you see heavily Aramaic in something that is supposed to be pre-exilic.
Ooh.
Okay. So.
Which tells you it was written later, right?
That part, was it written later?
Well,
was this whole section written later? Was only this part of the introduction up until verse 10, which is where the Eshet Chayil that we know of begins?
Yeah.
Was it supposed to be teaching a story? From this, where did this Aramaic come from? From this, the rabbis are all over the place on this. But they are very happy to point out that it is Aramaic. Without giving it much other talk.
So they're pointing that out, meaning they're discussing what? Its time frame?
They're discussing from this the time frame from this, but they're trying also to kind of skirt around this, because if it's all given by God, from this, and if we're going to attribute it to Solomon or even to King Hezekiah, from this, this is all pre-exilic. So where did this Aramaic come from?
Well, original, or it was put in by some editors later.
That's right. That's right.
But what's cool is they're talking about it.
Okay.
Right?
Well, here's what the Mishnah here's what Sanhedrin 70b has to say about this whole section. The words of King Lemuel, the burden with which his mother corrected him. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochar, this teaches that when Solomon's mother Bathsheba saw Solomon engaged in excessive drinking, she bound him to a pillar to have him flogged.
Oh my God.
And said to him, now we're into verse 2, what, my son, and what, son of my womb, and what, son of my vows? Meaning, what, my son? Everyone knows that your father David was a God-fearing man, and now when they see you sin, they will all say that his mother caused him to drink, that is, that you engaged in these behaviors because you're my son.
Oh, I thought you were saying,
and it goes on.
What is wrong with you?
But then it goes on. And what, son of my womb? That is to say, with regard to all of the women of your father's house, once they conceive, they no longer see the face of the king. But I pushed myself in and entered the king's chamber while I was pregnant, so that I'd have a son who was strong and fair-skinned, actually translated in some places as blonde. There are times during a woman's pregnancy, now this is the rabbis interjecting this, there are times during a woman's pregnancy when intercourse is beneficial for the development of the fetus.
My God.
Absolutely. They got it all mapped out by trimester.
That's right. That's right. They were definitely pro-life. Bathsheba was telling Solomon, I did my utmost to ensure that you had the extra strength and beauty, and now you use that strength and appeal to pursue drink.
Yeah.
And it goes on. And what, son of my vow, that is to say, with regard to all of the women of your father's house, they would take vows while they were pregnant, saying, let me have a son who was fit to be king. But I, by contrast, took a vow and said, let me have a son who was diligent and filled with knowledge of the Torah and fit for prophecy. So, a disappointment? No kidding.
Well, in a weird way, he's consistent with the younger Kohelet.
How is that?
Well, the way Kohelet described his life. He went all in for pleasure, for a good deal of it, to see if there was meaning in it.
Right, right. Then it goes on, and the Sanhedrin talks about the strong drink from this, and with a reference to verse 4 from this, to whom all the princes of the world would rise early to come to his door, should he drink wine and become intoxicated. So where did we know that Solomon repented and admitted to his mother that he was wrong? Because it says in verse 30, in Proverbs 30, verse 2, I am more foolish than a man and have not the understanding of a man. Okay, so why was he drinking, and why was all of this such a big deal? There's the midrash about the Pharaoh's daughter. And who was the Pharaoh's daughter?
She found Moshe.
She was one of Solomon's wives.
Wow.
One whom he loved greatly. Okay?
Oh.
So we're gonna look down on her now from this. Now, the reference to King Solomon going to the temple from this for the rededication, from this making sure that the ark of the covenant was placed in there, and then coming out and blessing the people and doing the sacrifices, is in two places. I'm sorry, 2 Kings and First Chronicles. And I took a look at both of at all of the references for this, and nowhere in this does it say, excuse me, that he arrived late to the ceremony. All right? Please keep this in mind. So here is the Midrash. When Bathsheba found out that Solomon was neglectful of his religious duties, he had married Pharaoh's daughter, and the subsequent revelry caused him to forget the morning sacrifice in the temple on the day of dedication. Since he had the key to the building, the service had to be delayed. Thereupon, his mother came and tied the king to a post and delivered the lecture to him, which takes up verses 2 through 9. This midrash, while fanciful and highly imaginative, is noteworthy because it catches the true intent of the biblical text, that is to say that it holds a strong critique of kingship, a critique which was possible only in the context of independent religious thought from this, but that he was sleeping with the Pharaoh's daughter, and that's what made him late. And why was he sleeping with her?
She was his wife.
Because he was drunk.
Oh.
And therefore not worthy from this to be doing all the things that he should be doing as a king, apparently including unlocking the temple.
A frat boy. He was a frat boy.
He was a frat boy.
A bad boy, yeah.
And now I'm wondering when the only other Lemuel I've ever heard of was Lemuel Gulliver in Gulliver's Travels. So now I'm wondering why Swift gave him the name.
From the, you know what? I don't recall that from this. Can you recall anything about him?
Well, he basically traveled to Lilliput. He traveled to.
Oh, that's
Gulliver himself.
Gulliver's Travels. Lemuel Gulliver.
Oh, how interesting!
That's interesting.
So in that case, was it because he was of God, or was he questioning the existence?
Or both.
We have to ask Mr. Swift, who wrote it.
That's right.
Brenda's father's Hebrew name was Lemuel.
Who?
Brenda's father's name was Lemuel.
Whose father?
My friend Norm's father's Hebrew name was Lemuel.
All right.
Well,
It could be, because his name, I just finished reading that novel, David's Secret Chord, about the rise of Solomon and Bathsheba and all the wives. And so it's a fiction book, but, he could have it could just be name. I mean, because Shmuel, instead of calling Shmoozy or something, she called him, Muel, the last part of his name, Muel. So, has anybody ever heard of just Muel? Muel? Or Shmuel? I mean, Shmuel is his name, but.
Well, yes, but
Shmulik,
okay.
Shmulik, yeah, Shmulik, but it has the shin, right? But just, she could call him this by his nickname, as an endearment. Who knows? But it's interesting.
Right.
They Sue?
Yes.
Sue, so who is this Pharaoh's daughter? Obviously, is there any tie to the Pharaoh's daughter in the Torah? I don't get it.
This was during a later period, because this was supposed to be one of the 1,000 wives of Solomon from this, but apparently this is one who apparently is specifically mentioned not only in Torah, in the Tanakh, when you read Kings and Chronicles about his relationships with women from this, which, by the way, the whole story of the Queen of Sheba is exactly 4 verses. Okay, for this, but there's a lot more about Pharaoh's daughter, but she is not given a name. She is simply known as Pharaoh's daughter from this, but apparently he married a lot of women. What is Rashi? Rashi says one of the other reasons that he overslept is because the Pharaoh's daughter brought all kinds of musical instruments into the temple, which disturbed Solomon's sleep. This caused him to oversleep on the day of the morning sacrifice. So
okay, so Pharaoh's daughter is not the same as the Queen of Sheba?
No,
they're
she's
not. They're,
a
okay.
completely different person from this.
Okay.
And he never took as a wife the Queen of Sheba. She simply came to visit from this, heard about his wisdom from this, had an opportunity to had a personal tour of Jerusalem and the palace for this provided spices, gold and all kinds of things, of which he took a lot of the wood and the gold from this and brought it into the temple, and it was used as part of the adornment in the temple from this. And then she and her posse left. So, if I ever do a thing on Kings and Chronicles for this, I am definitely talking about her for this. She's
and her posse. Oh,
looking forward to it, truly.
And she may have created Ethiopian jewelry with it.
Yeah.
So to move on. So we're very familiar with most of us are familiar with the whole Eshet Chayil.
So we're at 11:25. So
I know from this. I don't have that much more to go from this.
Okay.
So I just want to very briefly point out that Steinsaltz in 1994 wrote his treatise on the Woman of Valor and ascribed to every verse of that how women from Genesis forward from this were the women who were referenced in every single one of the statements that are in Eshet Chayil. And I have a grid here of all of the different verses and who it refers to. From this,
wait a minute. Verse 10 of Eshet Chayil.
Is about Noah's wife.
Noah's wife.
Verse 11 is about Sarah and so forth. And it's a little.
We can't even ask. Steinsaltz died last week, so we can't even ask him.
I know.
What he meant by all this.
Oh, yeah. Have respect.
That he found in all of these women attributes that he then correlated into Eshet Chayil from this, which my niece is currently in a group in Baltimore studying an interpretation of what Steinsaltz did from this, but every chapter of the book is about what the attribute of that particular woman was, why she was included in Eshet Chayil from this with a modern interpretation in the Orthodox community. So I give this to you as just one example. Yes.
Is this Steinsaltz himself, or is this he's taking from, I mean, he didn't make this up, right? He's saying Rashi says this.
Well, you know what? He probably, knowing Steinsaltz, because I knew him, we were like this. Is that Steinsaltz from this probably did a great deal of study from this, but then put this all in as logical a form as he could from this for us to understand from this, that to him, this is how Eshet Chayil is laid out. This is who it references.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Now, is the point of this to put women down and keep them in their place?
No, it's just it's apparently to elevate. I guess it's ostensibly to elevate women to say from this that when you read, for example, verse 28 from this. That her children arise and make her happy, and her husband praises her. That he equates this to the mitzvot of the Shunammite who cared for Elijah when he was ill.
could you say something?
And he writes a whole thing about that.
Could anybody say something about obviously this particular proverb there's a part 1 and a part 2, and I don't see the two of them going together all that well. The Eshet Hayim, Eshet Chayil.
That's exactly right.
Follow.
That's exactly right. It's sort of like ending the book of Numbers, and then we have all of Deuteronomy except for the last couple of chapters from this, which really are tied more into the book of Numbers than Devarim. Okay, so it's like that. It's like, well, what are we going to do with this? We probably should have something before that from this, so that Bathsheba is supposed to be, also throwing herself into this a little bit as well in verse 22 from this of basically saying to Solomon, don't forget all of these other women from this, because they are part of the influence of why you are who you are.
And this tradition of reciting Eshet Chayil, I mean, she's been slaving over the pot for Shabbos dinner. She's been making challah, and he shows up from shul. He says, oh, what an Eshet Chayil you are.
Yes, yes.
Well, this is her one time in the week
to get any credit.
Yeah.
So if you go to the next slide from this, it's very problematic for a lot of modern women like myself. From this, I invite you to please check out poetry that's found in the Jewish Women's Archive from this, of which I have there 2 interpretations of the term, let her works praise her in the gates. One from Gertrude Elion and one from a woman who calls herself Kohenet Achava Lilith Evershine from this in poetry that she's written from this. And the Jewish Women's Archive has a lot of fabulous poetry that gives an alternative look at Eshet Chayil from this. And I also invite you to look up Leah Kalish, who does this thing called Eshet Chayil of hip hop from this, a whole song where she and other women are wearing stroimels, walking around the old city of Jerusalem, and then wind up in Times Square, dancing, singing, and doing hip hop, but using as the undertone the traditional Eshet Chayil melody. So it's.
You haven't asked Ilana Kirshorn about this, have you?
No, I have not.
Yeah, on YouTube?
And yes, you can find it on YouTube. From this, if you type Leah Kalish, one of the first things that will come up it's called Eshet Chayil of hip hop. Okay, and by the way, she has her own website where she has that as well. From this, it's I was hoping maybe we could play it from this, but it's a little bit crude too. For this,
well, that's okay.
So, I know. From this, so there are some different ways to interpret that. To the next slide, please. From this, so I just want to end 2 things by pointing out that the word musar, which appears 51 times in the Tanakh, is seen at the very beginning of Proverbs in chapter 1 in verses 2 and 3. From this, so this is where musar came from? Is this the whole concept then of musar? From this, because what is musar?
Ethics.
It's ethics. It's ethics of what?
Of behavior of people.
And what is the whole of this particular wisdom literature that we've been reading of Proverbs?
Wisdom
talks about how we are to treat each other. From this, about it's the give and take from this of that you don't take from the poor, and there's a little story that comes behind it, and you don't do this because there's a little story behind it. From this, of these kinds of sayings, the same thing that musar is in a way doing. So in some ways, without Proverbs, there is no musar, and the terms are here. Let me quickly pull them up. In verse 2, chapter 1, it says, Lada'at Chachma Umusar Lavavin Imre Vina. To know wisdom and discipline, to fully grasp the words of understanding. And the following verse, Lakachat Musar Haskel Tzedek Umishpat Umesharim. To learn from discipline and there to understand righteousness, judgment, and correct behavior. And that is basically the essence of Musar. Does anybody have any last questions or comments before I have my concluding remarks?
Great.
Super stuff, Sue.
Okay, hold on. And one last slide.
One last slide.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Martin for all of his help in putting together these programs by running my PowerPoint and hosting. And to thank all of you for all of your time and attention from this and doing this. I am not a rabbinic expert. I'm not a Hebrew expert. I am not a Torah expert. I am simply driven by curiosity and passion from the things that I have been reading when I read, particularly the Siddur, because the Siddur is really the thing that we're reading most from this. We don't really spend a lot of time reading Torah except maybe on Shabbat. Some of us may do a little more study than that. But as I get older from this, I'm also questioning a lot of the things that I'm reading from this, and I'm looking particularly at the footnotes and the sources that a lot of these prayers come from, and I'm curious as to why these things, Psalms and Proverbs from this, have kind of found their way into our daily liturgy. And this is what drove me to do this class on Proverbs. I encourage all of you to spend some time really studying Proverbs. It's nice to take, little sentences and everything, because that's basically how it's written from this, but to look at the whole body of the work, it's going to really take a lifetime from this. And this is something that I intend to continue to take a look at. And I hope I've encouraged all of you to take a look at this relatively obscure book in Tanakh that we do not teach our kids. We do not teach really in adult ed. From this, it's kind of there. And just take a harder look at it. And I hope it serves as a point of inspiration, particularly as we move closer and closer into the high holiday season. So with that, any questions, any answers, any?
Thank you, Sue.
Rags?
Thank you
Great.
very much,
Thank you.
Sue.
Is here.
Thank you. I always learn a lot, and I felt that this really was excellent.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Sue. Is there a way to look at these PowerPoint slides?
Yes, I will compile all of them from all three of my talks, and I will send them out as a PDF document. I will do that, and I will also send, Al, you wanted the references to Orion, and I will send you all of that. And I'll also send you a brief bibliography of the sources that I used to put all of this together.
Oh, thank you. That would be great.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much.
You're
Next
very
we're going
welcome.
to have book club on the second week, but the third week is also, that evening is Yom Kippur. It's called Nidra. So we're not going to have September Shabbat study because the day
There's too much
was
going on.
not a good day to do it. So Peter will start his series in October, the
Correct.
third
Okay.
Sunday Shabbat.
Yes, and for those of you who are in the book group as well, I will be sending out some articles that we will be discussing. And on Tuesday, you will get a doodle poll to pick our next book.
Peter, you want to say something about your what your course is going to be starting in October?
Yeah, I am certainly not probably, my background in linguistics is good. My background in Jewish studies, a little less so. When I was asked what I thought of Maimonides, I said, I don't even know what they are. But on the other hand,
Well, they're Maimonides at least.
Ooh. Who said that?
what I would like to do is put Hebrew and Yiddish into a broader context and talk about Jewish languages as a whole from a linguistic point of view, and make a case. You know, if you come from a strictly Ashkenazic Eastern European background, there's, you know, Hebrew, the Lashon HaKodesh, and there's Yiddish, the Mama Loshen. And it, you know, I've heard people think of them just as these two. And I've also heard people really misunderstand what Yiddish is and talk about it as a bastardized language. And so I'd like to, you know, as I say, I don't have tremendous depth in any of them, but I think I can put them into a larger context and a linguistic context, and that's what I plan to do.
Good.
Are you going to talk about Ladino or any of the Sephardic languages?
Certainly talk about Ladino. I'm not, you know, I probably could use a lot of help from my friends. There are a lot of languages like Judeo-Persian, Judeo-Arabic that I don't know much about, but I will certainly talk about Ladino. As a matter of fact, I have a good friend who's kind of a specialist in Ladino, and you know, I might ask the group if I can't bring her in for that particular part.
Is it Isabel?
Pardon me?
Is it Isabel Gans?
No, although Isabel Gans is very good. This is a woman named Louisa Kluger. Does anybody know?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Yes.
you know, I would be faking it, but Louisa would know quite a bit. And so,
Right.
anyway,
Great.
but I'll certainly be talking about Ladino. But who asked about the other Sephardic languages?
Sandra did.
Okay, Sandra, if you could actually let me know what you have in mind by other Sephardic languages.
Oh, I don't know enough about it. I just know there was a Persian, there was an Arabic Jewish, you know, I don't know anything about them though.
You know, there I'm going to be kind of limiting the languages I'll talk about somewhat artificially. There are a whole bunch of languages written in Hebrew script that would have some borrowings, but I don't know enough about all. I can find out a little bit about some of them, but they're not as significant as the ones I'll be talking about.
Oh,
Yeah,
you determine the
people from Bukhara in Israel, they had a certain kind of Hebrew that they had in the, I guess in the Bukharan part of, you know, what we now call Southern Russia. I don't, you know.
Well, Peter, you're doing the talks. You set the boundaries for. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot.
We know less than you do about this. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
Anyway, some of you know more in some spots, but I think anyway, with a little help from my friends, we'll find some interesting things to talk about.
Peter,
Great.
looking forward to learning about this from the perspective of a professional linguist. I think all of us are, you know, we're thinking that. It'll be a very different perspective than most of us are able to provide. So
Some of us on the school are what we call charlatans when it comes to
That's right. Before we leave, also, I want to just say hello. You all can say wave hello to Glenda Regenbaum, who joined us today. She's a friend of Ed and Glory Chaikas and through the Melton program. So welcome, and I
saw her. Hi.
I hope that you'll be attending future programs. So.
Great.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Thank
See
you,
all
Sue.
of you. Excellent.
Stay healthy and safe.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.